He knows landing to refuel during the voyage risks alerting authorities. But the only aircraft that can fly non-stop are large cargo planes.
Those airplanes get on the watch list right off. And eventually those airplanes get caught.
So Rick sets out to turn an innocent-looking Cessna 310, designed to fly 900 miles, into a long-distance superplane. The first step is to increase fuel capacity.
Rick took a plane that would normally carry 2,000 gallons of fuel and outfit them so they could carry 6,000.
But the government had law enforcement looking for airplanes that had tanks inside the cabin or suspicious-looking plumbing.
So Lychus stores extra fuel in rubber bladders, hidden in the nose, under the cabin floor, in the luggage compartments, and in hollow spaces in the wings.
The plane was basically a flying fuel tank.
To control the flow of fuel from these extra tanks, Lychus builds a centralized distribution system that supplies the engines evenly while maintaining aircraft balance. But with added fuel comes added weight.
Once you add that much fuel, you needed to reinforce the wings, you needed to reinforce the wheel struts, you needed to increase the strength of the engines. So he would put in engines with much more horsepower. Anyone looking at it would say there's no way that plane can fly from here to Colombia.
To avoid suspicion from authorities, Lychus obtains an FAA certificate declaring all the modifications perfectly legal.
And law enforcement doesn't have any probable cause to mess with the airplane.
Inside the cockpit, Rick installs custom-designed radar to alert him to weather conditions and government air patrols.
If Rick was a genius, it wasn't only equipping the planes, it was figuring out a way of evading the radar and drug enforcement system.
To defeat the DEA security dragnet, Lychus targets a crooked customs agent who sells him a list of radar locations, plus flight paths and schedules of all coastal patrol aircraft. He also sets up a radio network spanning 2 continents and develops a secret communications code to keep in contact with the cartel during flight.
No, he was very shrewd. He was very smart. He was very calculating. It was obvious he put a lot of thought into each step that he did.
Throughout his preparations, Rick is careful not to arouse the suspicion of his contacts in the DEA.
The agents got very close to Rick. Part of it was that he is a charming guy, and I think he charmed them.
Finally, after 3 months of planning, Rick takes off on his maiden voyage and flies a direct route to Colombia. 13 hours later, he arrives. While the Colombians load his plane with coke, Rick makes a careful calculation of the plane's new weight and the exact length and state of the runway.
The trouble is the fields that they were taking off from were generally unpaved. There were trees at the end.
After a short rest, Rick departs. His tiny plane carries 800 pounds of cocaine and is 2,000 pounds heavier than the recommended limit.
The plane had to struggle to get off the ground and clear those trees. And off the coast of Colombia, there are a lot of wrecks of planes that didn't quite make it.
The engine modifications and upgraded horsepower in Rick's plane get him safely airborne, but he doesn't return home by the same route. Instead, he takes a new flight path that authorities had never even considered, the 73rd Meridian.
He'd figured out that if he could equip the planes to fly further, he would stay out of the pattern of radar detection.
But 5 hours into the flight, Rick's custom-built aircraft detection system alerts him to a Navy tracker plane hot on his tail. Using his weather radar, he locates a nearby electrical storm.
If you're getting painted by radar and what you're worried about is being caught and going to jail for the rest of your life, you might be willing to go into a storm assuming that the law enforcement pilot's not going to do that.
To escape, Rick flies straight into the heart of the storm.
Rick was an outstanding pilot. If he wasn't the best drug smuggling pilot, he was damn close.
The Navy vessel refuses to follow and loses him on the radar. 2 hours later, Rick emerges from the storm and turns sharply inland. Flying below radar, he heads for an abandoned commuter landing strip. He approaches the runway, but instead of landing, he rises sharply to 1,500 feet. After flying 3,000 miles from Colombia, he appears on radar for the first time.
He would fly very low altitudes to penetrate the radar and pop up so he could look as though he's a normal airplane.
Rick then radios the Scranton Control Tower and has them log his flight as a brief commuter hop. Arriving safely home, he unloads 800 pounds of cocaine and collects over $1 million. His success, however, will be threatened when his Florida pot smuggling days come back to haunt him. Rick Leiches has been paid over $1 million by the Medellin cartel for smuggling 800 pounds of cocaine into the U.S. The cartel is so impressed, they have Rick make regular runs for them over the next year.
Rick was in it because it was an adventure, and the money allowed him to do the adventurous things that he wanted to do.
Gaining confidence, he now expands his operations, hiring extra pilots and increasing flights.
It's like you feeding a mouse to a big cobra. You're going to be really careful the first couple of times you do it. But if that cobra doesn't bite you, pretty soon you're just casually lifting the lid, throwing the mouse in and closing the lid. And you do that time and time again.
Leiches prides himself on the efficiency of the operation.
He used to joke that he was the Federal Express of the drug business.
Rick used to brag that he would be plus or minus 3 minutes of any time you told him anywhere in the world.
The first 4 trips we did, the Colombians were ready for us. When we were ready for the 5th trip, the Colombians told us we had to wait because we ran them out of product. They were giddy with the schedule.
They never lost a flight, never crashed. They always delivered on time. And the Colombians appreciated that. They even gave him a raise.
Meanwhile, the DEA, not realizing that Rick is a smuggler, lean on him for more information about the drug trade.
And he did manage to provide a lot of useful information, but it was very strategically chosen.
Then, in 1984, disaster strikes.
One day the cobra's pissed, and he bites you. You see, you think, why did that happen? That's never happened before.
The Tampa pot ring that Leiches flew his first